Okay, good afternoon, everybody. First of all, thank you, the organizers and the two authors of this draft report for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. And what I would like to do today is give you three reflections which are quite related to my background. I'm a social worker and sociologist, so I'm not a criminologist. And I have, since 1994, I have been doing empirical work, so trying to understand what is actually happening in the field of security by doing a lot of research on policing. And secondly, as a sociologist, I'm working in the Department of Public Administration, which is located in the Faculty of Economics, which is a little bit different than the other participants here today. So my reflections are based on that. I have 3 points I would like to make. First of all, I would like to go into a very specific section, and I'm not going to reread it, but it's a section on policing, because I think in a multicultural society, policing is very important. I think that the police, when you look at the law on policing and the Belgian law on the police function, actually it stipulates that the police should fulfill their tasks taking into account human rights and freedoms. And in that sense, they are a little bit guardians of human rights and freedoms. And I think that they are in the field, they are actually, balancing different kinds of stuff. And that is what I would like to contribute here. When I read the report, I see, Frank, that you might have made another interpretation of the research that we have done in 2009. You are referring to our research on multicultural neighborhoods. You were part of it as an expert, but we read it differently. So I would like to re-explain it a little bit, if you allow me. Okay, so I would like to point out the true dynamics of over and under policing. Now, I'm referring to a study, which first of all, this is not a plea to deny the problematic relationship between the police and ethnic minorities. I would just like to add some nuances and some refinement to a specific section in the report that states that our police should be, or would be, or is racist, or does a lot of ethnic profiling. I would like to add some nuances on the basis of empirical research that we have done. So that research was about the implementation of community-oriented policing in our society, which is a choice by our policymakers. In the law on the integrated police in 1998, there was an explicit choice to go for a policy that wanted to implement community-oriented policing, and that is in that study we have looked on how it developed or how it became, or how it affected practices in different kind of multicultural neighborhoods in Belgium, that means in the Walloon provinces in Brussels, but also in Flanders, and we looked at how the police, but also ethnic minorities, look to each other. Of course, social constructionism, but of course you first need to know how people perceive each other, what they think about stuff, before you can actually go any further. So we looked at what kind of dynamics took place, and that was a core of our research there. Important to note is that we actually transcended the research that existed up till then, because there's a lot of focus on Moroccan and Turkish communities. So we looked at the broader group of ethnic minorities being part of those multicultural neighborhoods in Belgium. I think that is important. We also looked at different migration waves. So we also took into consideration that after the second wave, you had the third one, which was more dispersed and more diverse. So we also took that into consideration. We also looked not only at youngsters, but at everybody, which was part of that multicultural neighborhood. So also older people. We talked to older people as well. And I think it's important to notice that we looked at how the police treated them in terms of intervention, so driving around with a car, but also neighborhood policing, talking to people and be very close to them in those neighborhoods. So the main finding there, and you can see it on the next slide, the main finding there is that actually the research shows that there's a kind of poor relationship between the police and the community. The police over-polices just a piece of communities, and the rest is under-policed. But over and under-policing is really two sides of the same coin, and that is what I would like to explain just a little bit more today. An important aspect of our findings for this report is that over-policing is not according to ethnic lines. So in the over-policing, you have ethnic minorities, but also indigenous people. And I think that is an important nuance to add to how the police deals with the multicultural society these days. Another thing that is important is that it's about groups and not about neighborhoods. So the over-policing is about groups in certain neighborhoods, but the police is not over-policing certain neighborhoods. So let me explain it just a little bit more in detail by giving you my next slide, which shows the implications. So let me just go over this slide in a horizontal way. Let me try to explain to you what it means if the police over-polices and under-polices certain groups in multicultural neighborhoods. So what does under-policing or what does over-policing actually means? Who is being over-policed? People who are over-policed are just a small minority of groups within and individuals in the neighborhoods. There are migrant communities, but also indigenous people, and I think that is very important for the discussion today. The police has a feeling of proximity with those groups, not mentally, of course, but they are very close on their skin because they are often asking for intervention by the police, and the police cannot do anything else than to respond to them. So you are regular customers that generate a lot of work of the police. So they are repeatedly asking help from the police for all kinds of interventions, also a cat in a tree or little stuff that they have to do. So when the police is called, they pay attention to it and they intervene, or in a repressive way, but also in a very caring way, because those people actually only have the police to call to, and they don't have any social support. These groups that are over-policed, they do not have any backup. They do not have any social networks. So those people call the police because these are the only ones to call to. But those over-policed that call the police in that way are indigenous people and members of ethnic minorities. So there's no difference there. Both are part of it. I think that's a nuance to what is written in the report. So the police see these regular customers as very difficult. They are known groups and very tangible, which has a difference with the under-policed groups, which are unknown groups in society. They are unknown groups, groups that have dynamics that the police do not know of. So they are not tangible, so they do not have any information on that. They are at a distance, so they're very, very much, the police has a suspicion that things are happening in those unknown groups, and unknown groups who are under-policed also contain indigenous people and members of ethnic minorities. So in that respect, those who are under-policed do get no attention of the police because they do not know them. So you can ask yourself, who is then under-policed? Well, there are a lot of mobile groups who are being under-policed, like newcomers in that third migration wave. They are not known to the police, they come in, like we had the big group of migrants coming in, or asylum-seeking people coming in our country lately. They are not known to the police, so they can't be dealt with in a very knowledgeable way. Of course, there's no information on it. Other mobile groups are also students, for example. A lot of cities are overwhelmed by students which are not known by the police, or not their background are not known. Another group that is over-policed are new citizens, newcomers, new bigger groups, like, for example, East Europeans. The police do not have a lot of information about it. And what happens there is that you have a sense of, well, cliches that exist in our society are being taken over by the police because there's no alternative. So they just use them. East Europeans use a lot of violence, well, the police accepts that and uses it in treating those people. Another group that is under-policed is actually groups that have been in neighborhoods for a long time. Sorry. Like Like, for example, Turkish people, Turkish community, or Pakistani. The police do have a good relationship with them. They have a lot of respect, reciprocal respect, but those communities take care of their own stuff. When they have problems, they solve it themselves. They don't call the police. So these are also under-policed. They have an own system of conflict solving their conflict, sorry. Now, what does that mean? When you see those differences, it is being reflected in the kind of images, the kind of labels that police officers develop to treat those people. When you are regularly, let's say, when I'm regularly every week confronted with a problem of you, then next week I know that I should take care of you in this way or in that way, so I know you. So in that respect, I give you names. So I said, okay, that's that wicked girl. She always calls me for this, and if I treat her that way, it will be okay. So you're labeling the people you're confronted with constantly. So you give them names. And those names can be very harsh, can be very, when you hear them, they don't sound very nice. But in the police culture, these names are used in between police officers to talk about the way to deal with those very complicated communities. So in that sense, it's very functional. So they use context information to label those people. And because they have a lot of context information, they know how to deal with those people in different ways. They have a whole spectrum of dealing with it. So they can be very soft, but very hard if needed. And that is not the case when they do not have any information. When they do not have any information, they lack context information, they use cliches, and they fall back on a consensus approach, which is like, I do not know what to expect, so we go for the bigger, much more repressive than preventive and softer approach. So that's a big difference, I think, that we should take into account in this dealing with multicultural neighborhood. Now, another finding that I found very important to address here is the following. So, I'm not ignoring the practice that police officers do label, sometimes in a discriminating way. They use ugly words to name people, and they know how to handle them on the basis of that name, because that name reflects a kind of comportment or dealing with the problems of those people. But that does not necessarily mean that it always leads to discrimination, because we have found out that although police officers label members of multicultural neighborhoods in different ways, so the stereotyping that we have found out, so the kind of thinking, leads to or can lead to prejudices, feelings and appreciations, but it does not necessarily have to lead to discrimination, to acting. So that relationship is very, very complex. So it's not because certain police officers, we have observed that certain police officers use certain ugly labels to make jokes about people in multicultural neighborhoods, jokes on on their socioeconomic backgrounds, when it's indigenous people, on the color of their skin, when there are members of ethnic minorities. They make jokes. This is part of police culture. Let's not ignore it. But it does not necessarily lead to acting, to discriminative acting, or to a different treatment of people from different backgrounds. So I think that's a nuance that has to be added here. Now, when does a stereotype lead to a prejudice, leads to a discrimination? What are the factors that are influencing that? When does somebody who uses a label also act accordingly? What is happening in practice there? Well, first of all, there are priorities. So agents, so police personnel on the street actually construct their own mental crime profiles. I think that we should be aware of the fact, if we want to understand what is happening in practice, that certain police officers are constantly confronted with the same kind of problems in the same kind of neighborhoods. So it's very difficult for them to get a mindset to get out of it. Yeah. So I think that they're being caught in that thinking. And if they see people who act accordingly to their images, they act accordingly, and they can be very discriminative. So I would not ignore it. Let me give my second and third point very shortly to end up, but I see that I've taken up too much time. I've read in the report, does the repressive apparatus need to multiculturalize? And you said no, Frank, in your report. Or it must be a mistake of, you said no. And I did not really understand that. Because I just heard in your presentation that you said that the magistrates and the prosecutors, you didn't find any Moroccan background or Turkish background. So I was wondering if you need to multiculturalize that institution, you should at the same time multiculturalize your police force.
I'm very much in favor of it. I don't know where it stands.
I can show you. Maybe it was. Does the repressive apparatus need to multiculturalize? No? Yeah?
In general.
Yes, and generally, yeah. So when I look at the police, I say yes.
My point was, of course, that people who commit the same crimes should be confronted with the same behavior of police and the same behavior of the magistrates.
Maybe we can discuss that, yeah, because...
You asked, do you think that we need more police officers from minority groups? Well, the rest of my page is about how to influence that in a positive way, isn't it?
Not necessarily, to my opinion, but we can go into that. Yes, yes, we have to discuss that in a discussion, okay. And the last point, yes, I conclude with the fact that from a public administration point of view, of course, I think it's important to know that in dealing with problems in our society, and the problems can become very complex in a multicultural society, I think from a policy perspective that it's necessary to be aware of the fact that the police is only one actor, and that we are moving from government to governance so that more actors in the public and private sphere are actually contributing to security, and that a network approach there is important. Not only a network approach within the policy domain of security, but also a network approach between different policy levels. And I mean more, if you cut back on health, if you cut back in the sector of housing, it has an influence on the sector of security. So integral security means that you work together in an integral way in those different kind of policy levels. So I think that maybe in the report there might be a suggestion for some recommendations to actually bring those things together, because they are communicating vessels. If you cut back on health, in a policy domain you don't have any money anymore. So when we open up an extra can of police officers to deal with terrorism, we can't invest in our social policies, right? So we have cutbacks in our local communities, and it affects security. So we have to deal with that interrelated network approach, I think. Thank you very much.